The day I bought that lottery ticket, I had no idea my life would spiral into chaos. A single piece of paper with 6 numbers, a dream we all secretly harbor, and yet, it became the catalyst for the most painful betrayal I'd ever endure. It started like any other Friday. I stopped by the corner store after work to grab a coffee and decided, on a whim, to pick up a lottery ticket. You never know, I'd told myself, stuffing it into my wallet alongside gas receipts and expired coupons. At home, my wife, Lisa, greeted me with her usual warmth. We'd been married for 7 years, and though things hadn't been perfect lately, I still believed we were a team. The winning numbers were announced that Sunday night. I'll never forget it. I was sitting on the couch, pizza box on the coffee table, and Lisa scrolling through her phone when the numbers flashed on the screen. I read them out loud, and as I did, my heart started pounding. 15, 27, 34, 40, 42, and 49. I couldn't believe it. I had them all. Lisa, I stammered, holding the ticket up with trembling hands. We won. We won. For a moment, her face lit up with shock and joy. She hugged me, and I thought, this is it. This is our moment. Little did I know, that hug would be the last honest moment we'd share. Because 3 days later, the ticket was gone. And so was Lisa. Lisa and I had met in college. She was the kind of person who lit up a room, effortlessly charming and full of ambition. I was a bit more reserved, content with my books and a quiet life, but somehow, she saw something in me. We fell fast and hard, and by the time we graduated, we were inseparable. She worked her way up in marketing, while I settled into a steady job as an IT specialist. We bought a modest home, spent weekends hosting barbecues for friends, and talked often about the future, kids, travel, retirement on a beach somewhere. But over the last year, cracks had started to show. Lisa had grown distant and distracted. She'd stay late at work more often, her phone glued to her hand even when we were together. I'd chalked it up to stress. She'd mentioned a big project at the office that was eating up her time. You're working too hard, I'd tease, and she'd smile and kiss my cheek, telling me not to worry. Looking back, there were warning signs I ignored. Like how she'd started making comments about money, how we never seemed to have enough, how she wished we could afford nicer things, or the way she'd get irritated when I'd suggest a quiet night in instead of going out. But we'd always been able to talk things through before, so I assumed we'd get through this too. The night we won the lottery, I thought it would fix everything. I imagined paying off our mortgage, surprising Lisa with the vacation she'd always wanted, and maybe even starting that family we'd put off for so long. It felt like fate was finally smiling on us. But as the days passed, something felt off. Lisa's excitement seemed muted. She wasn't talking about what we'd do with the money or dreaming out loud like I was. Instead, she grew more withdrawn. I figured she was just overwhelmed. It was a lot to process, after all. Then came that Wednesday morning. I woke up to an empty bed and a strange, hollow quiet in the house. Lisa's things were gone, her clothes, her laptop, even her toothbrush. At first, I thought maybe she'd left early for work, but then I saw the envelope on the kitchen counter. My name was scribbled on the front in her handwriting. Inside, there was no explanation, no apology, just the words, "I'm sorry." And the ticket, the winning ticket, was nowhere to be found. Panic set in immediately. I called Lisa's phone over and over, but it went straight to voicemail. I checked her work, and her favorite coffee shop, and even drove by her sister's house, nothing. She had vanished. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with question. Why would she do this? Where did she go? And the one I couldn't shake, was I that blind to who she was? By the next day, I'd filed a police report. They took down the details, her description, the fact that she'd taken the ticket, but their response was lukewarm at best. It's not exactly a criminal matter, the officer had said with a shrug. You're married, shared property and all that. If she doesn't want to be found, there's not much we can do. Frustrated and desperate, I turned to anyone who might help. I called mutual friends, but most of them hadn't heard from Lisa in weeks. Her sister was sympathetic but tight-lipped. She's going through a lot, was all she'd say. That only made me angrier. Going through what? I wanted to shout. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of her. Meanwhile, the Lottery Commission's deadline for claiming the prize loomed closer. I found myself obsessively checking the news, terrified I'd see her smiling face holding a giant check. But no, there was nothing. It was like she'd disappeared off the face of the earth. Then, one evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. My heart leaped as I answered, half hoping it was Lisa, but instead, it was a man's voice. "Mr. Carter," he asked. "My name's Greg. I think we need to talk." Greg turned out to be a private investigator. Lisa's employer had hired him a few months ago to look into discrepancies in her work. She'd been funneling money out of company accounts for over a year. "She's in some deep trouble," Greg told me, "and from what I've found, it looks like she's planning to run, permanently." My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about the lottery ticket. Lisa had been living a double life, and I'd been too blind, or too trusting, to see it. Greg offered to keep digging, but his services weren't cheap. I agreed anyway. I needed answers. Over the next few days, Greg uncovered more than I could have imagined. Lisa had drained our joint savings account. She'd bought plane tickets to Mexico under a fake name. And the kicker? She wasn't alone. There was another man, a coworker, someone I'd met once at a holiday party. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Rage boiled in my chest, but so did something else, determination. Lisa might have thought she could betray me and get away with it, but she underestimated one thing. That lottery ticket. I'd made a photocopy of it the night we won, just in case. And now, that little piece of insurance was my best chance at justice. I contacted the lottery commission armed with my photocopy and Greg's evidence. At first, they were hesitant, citing protocol and the need for the original ticket. But then Greg presented surveillance footage he'd obtained from the corner store where I'd bought the ticket. There I was, holding the winning numbers, time-stamped and indisputable. It was enough to put a hold on the payout, a temporary victory, but a victory nonetheless. Meanwhile, Greg tracked Lisa to a small hotel near the border. She was still there, likely waiting for the right moment to cross over with her lover. The thought of her lounging in some dingy motel room, smug and satisfied, made my blood boil. I couldn't let her win. With Greg's help, I coordinated with local authorities. The plan was simple: catch her off guard before she could slip away. The night of the operation, I waited in the parking lot, heart pounding as unmarked cars surrounded the hotel. When they brought her out in handcuffs, she looked up and saw me standing there. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I saw something flicker across her face. Was it regret? Fear? I'll never know. You thought you'd won, I said coldly as they led her away. But you underestimated me. The lottery payout was eventually cleared in my name, and Lisa faced charges of embezzlement and theft. It wasn't the ending I'd dreamed of when I first bought that ticket, but as I deposited the check into my account, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: peace. In the aftermath of Lisa's arrest, the pieces of my life began to slowly come back together. The money, once a symbol of shattered trust, became a tool for rebuilding. I paid off the mortgage and set aside a substantial amount for savings. But it wasn't the financial relief that mattered most, it was the clarity and closure. Lisa's trial made headlines, and her double life was exposed for all to see. It was surreal watching the woman I once loved portrayed as a villain in the media, but I couldn't bring myself to feel pity. She'd made her choices, and now, she was facing the consequences. Her accomplice, the coworker she'd run off with, also faced charges, and their desperate plan unraveled completely in the courtroom. Friends and family rallied around me during this time. People I hadn't spoken to in years offered support and encouragement. It reminded me that I hadn't lost everything while I'd lost Lisa. Slowly, I began to rediscover who I was outside of our marriage. One day, I received a letter from Lisa. Written from prison, it was a mix of apologies and justifications. She claimed she'd felt trapped, unfulfilled, and desperate for a way out. But her words, though eloquent, felt hollow. I read it once, then tucked it away in a drawer. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something I could give her, at least, not yet. Maybe someday. As for the lottery winnings, I decided to use them wisely. I donated a portion to charities that supported financial literacy and victims of fraud. It felt fitting, a way to turn something tainted by greed into a force for good. The rest, I invested cautiously, determined to secure a future that Lisa had tried to steal from me. In the quiet moments, I sometimes wondered if I'd ever truly understand why she did what she did. But as the weeks turned into months, those thoughts came less frequently. Life moved on, and so did I. And while the scars of betrayal remained, they no longer defined me. In their place grew a resilience I never knew I had. Karma had done its work, and now, it was my turn to live, not as a victim, but as someone who'd survived, learned, and ultimately thrived. Ultimately, the betrayal that once shattered me became a turning point. I emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-reliant than ever before. Life doesn't always go as planned, but sometimes, the detours lead us to exactly where we're meant to be. Like and subscribe for more interesting stories.